DA. Much of what LRH said and wrote is gibberish, but do Scientologists understand it? If you were to look up the misunderstood words, would it make sense within a Scientology context, or do Scientologists pretend they get it? Well, you're going to find both, of course. But the thing about the human mind is its capacity to be able to correlate or relate two pieces of information that might have absolutely nothing to do with one another, either logically or physically or in reality. But people are able to make those connections. That is partly imagination, partly, experience, partly learning. I mean, there's a lot of different labels we use for this stuff, but it's really, really, I've called it the miracle of human thought that we are able to do that, because it's both a good and bad thing. We would never be able to have imagination or creative thought or be able to, move any ball down the road progressively if we didn't have the ability to consider new ideas and contemplate them mixed in with other ideas that might not seem to fit and come up with something new. That's pretty cool. But when it comes down to the individual now being indoctrinated or educated into a new belief system, there's a thing called cognitive dissonance where you get these, two or more pieces of information and they don't go together. They seem to be mutually exclusive, and still, we are able to invent new reasons or rationalizations or ideas that will justify or rationalize why those two things are not mutually exclusive. And I'll give you an example. What would be an example of that? Well, there's thousands of them. We do it every day, by the way. This is a common, useful, ordinary part of our thinking. It happens all the time, okay? It's just sometimes some of those rationalizations and justifications are kind of a big deal for us. And we have to, and it causes us to then maybe act in ways that are not so wonderful, specifically with cults, of course. So, example, Scientology has a creed. I have gone over it here, where they have a line in the creed that says all men of whatever race, color, creed have inalienable rights to think freely, write freely, talk freely, their own opinions, and let's see. I'm not quoting it exactly here. I already messed it up, but it's basically all people have the inalienable right to think freely, talk freely, write freely, and to counter or utter or write upon the opinions of others. Okay, so you have according to the creed of the Church of Scientology, you have the right, the inalienable right. Nobody can take it away from you, to be able to write and think and talk freely and to counter or utter or write upon the opinions of others. Well, you have that right all the way up until the point that you start criticizing David Miscavige or L. Ron Hubbard directly, at which point you will be pulled down into a room, or if you're in a course room already and you're running across some information, you go, this doesn't seem right. And you are trying to work it out and it's not working out, it doesn't make sense. And you start saying, well, this just doesn't make sense. A course room supervisor or word clearer or some other Scientologist at some point in time will come up to you or will sit down with you and go over how it does make sense, how what L. Ron Hubbard wrote or said does make sense universally. And in fact, with the creed here, we could pull that out and say, absolutely, everybody's got that right. However, then comes this other piece of information that runs right up against it, which is Scientology will disconnect you. You have to leave Scientology, get kicked out of Scientology if you start talking about it publicly in a nasty way. And there's even an ethics justice code in their great big thick ethics book about how you're not supposed to be bad-mouthing Scientology in the public forum. So it's actually a justice matter if you start doing that, which is why I got in trouble initially as a Scientologist, because I was doing exactly that, and they don't like that. They consider such activity anti-Scientology, or you're now being an anti-Scientologist, and there's a whole nother set of issues and writings from Hubbard that now come into the picture where you're an antisocial personality because of the fact that you're an anti-Scientologist. And yet, wait a second, I thought I had the right to write counter or to write upon or counter the opinions of others. So now I don't have that right? Oh, no, you have that right. You have that right. You absolutely have that right. All the way out the door you go with that right. There you go. Bye-bye. No personal freedom or immortality for you. You go have fun enjoying your right to counter, utter, or write upon the opinions of L. Ron Hubbard or David Miscavige and see how far that gets you in the world of Scientology. So, so yeah, sure, these two things go together, but do they really? No, of course they don't. And that's how you get this push-pull of information, contradictory information within the scriptures of Scientology. So to come back to your question, if you look up the misunderstood words, would it still make sense within a Scientology context? Well, if you sort of do the mental gymnastics to make those two things I just described make sense to you, then yes, within a Scientology context, you can make it make sense. But from a more objective point of view, it doesn't make sense because it's contradictory, right? You can't have the right to speak freely, talk freely, and write freely upon whatever you want, but then get kicked out for doing so. These two things are, they don't go well together, but Scientologists do reconcile those things. And that's just one of many kind of, such reconciliations they have to make while going through Hubbard's materials. And that's what we call a Scientology education, is working that stuff out, and there's not a lot of, pick and choose. You can take this, you can't take that. There's you don't have to take this, but you have to, but this is okay. It's all or nothing with Scientology is what I'm trying to say there. So anyway, that's kind of how it works. And it's like that in all, the power of choice over whether you accept a piece of information from L. Ron Hubbard or not is not really there. I mean, do Scientologists reject some of Hubbard's information? Yes, of course they do. Everybody's individual. Everybody's got their own thing. My mom, for example, was a registered pediatric nurse while I was growing up, and she was getting into Scientology and started working for the organization. And she told me flat out, years after the fact, that she had never agreed with or bought into L. Ron Hubbard's criticisms of psychiatry and psychology. She didn't buy into it. She didn't think it was that bad. She knew psychologists. She knew psychiatrists. She worked with them. And she knew that they were not all evil, mustache twirling, we're going to do away with this world. That's what we're going to do. We're going to destroy everything. She knew they weren't like that, but, Hubbard kept insisting they were. So she was able to reject that because her real world experience countered it too much. But in the grand scheme of things, it was okay because that wasn't a real big thing when she was in Scientology. CCHR and the whole anti-psychiatry movement really ramped up quite a bit under David Miscavige. So it existed under L. Ron Hubbard. He made sure that was happening. But it wasn't really in her face the way it developed into the way it was in my face when I was in Scientology and in the Sea Org. So she was safely able to sort of, park that one to the side and continue to accept and follow the mainline teachings of L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology. And so she got along fine. But if you start, countering, well, this reactive mind thing doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I don't think that thing exists. And if they can't reconcile you around to, through going over the words, going over the concepts, demonstrating it, working out examples of it, if they can't get you to see that that's a thing, that the reactive mind is real and exists, and there's engrams and locks and secondaries, and you're going to go into session, you're going to run this stuff out, and it's going to make your life better, and it's going to change everything for you. If you can't ever buy into the existence of that, you're probably going to be out the door before too long, because that's a basic foundational principle of Dianetics and Scientology. You can't really do Dianetics and Scientology if you don't acknowledge the reactive mind is real. So, so data in Scientology has relative importances, and so not everything equals everything. And That's how it works. So, anyway, I hope that helps clarify and answer your question. Thanks for asking.